expression of an organization's goals, aspirations, and values. That is something that I learned many years ago from a superintendent of schools, because I was in the field of education, who said to me, and to me it made a lot of sense, that really the budget is not just a bunch of numbers, but rather it is an expression of what we're trying to accomplish as an organization. And all of the categories within the budget are reflections of what it is that we're trying to accomplish and what the values of the organization are. So, thought I'd start out with that. This next one is really a very big issue. This is probably one of the greatest responsibilities as a board member that you have, is the fiduciary responsibility in regards to the development and monitoring of the budget. Well, what does that really mean? Right? It means individually and collectively that we have the responsibility to assure that our financial accounting processes, our budget development processes, our monitoring process is all in compliance with laws and regulations. Right. Now, how do you know that? How do I know that? Well, that's where our administration does play a role, along with me as treasurer, is to keep our eyes tuned to what's happening at both either federal or state levels to assure that we are in compliance with appropriate laws and regulations. And when those come up, then it's our responsibility to make you aware of them so that you have that knowledge as you're looking at budgets and our financial accounting processes. But the second part of that really relates to more the responsibility that we have to the congregation. On an annual basis, when the congregation approves that budget, what they're really approving, again, is a set of purposes and intents for us to spend money to operate the synagogue. And it's our responsibility and administration's to assure that the way we spend that money is in compliance with what the congregation approved. So those two pieces really, as far as I am concerned, make up the fiduciary responsibility we have. Laws and regulations and the intent and purposes that the congregation approved the budget for. Okay. Okay, what is the makeup of the budget? Okay, our revenues are comprised of membership dues, our fees that we charge for religious and Hebrew schools, the fundraising activities that we have, like
Shazam.
okay, I'm up to, okay, right there. Okay, thank you. Maybe you could do it for me and I'll do it for you. Sure. How's that? Okay, pursue, as I said, fundraising like Food Festival, but we also pursue grants. For example, there's grants provided by the Federation that help support students with special needs in our religious and Hebrew schools. And I think that's an area too that we probably need to look more at, and I think we will. Endowments, and Jesse will be talking more about that in the next section of the presentation. But basically, there are parts of the endowments whether it be interest and dividends off of our investments, the management fee that we charge for administering the endowments that the temple charges, and in part the principal of some of the endowments which go into the budget to make sure that the budget is in balance between revenue and expenses. The expenses are voluminous. Everything from staff salaries to heat and light, to the rabbi's contract, to a variety of areas that make up the budget. I'd like to make you aware, I was not going to go through it tonight because it would, quite frankly, would take too much time. But I am going to hold a session along with Sue next Tuesday prior to the board meeting to actually take you through each one of the line items so that it's absolutely clear to you what is comprised in that line item. And we're also going to be doing some other work with you regarding the analysis of the endowments that we want to share with you as well. Again, it'll be at 6 o'clock. We'll probably have a light dinner of pizza and some salad. If you can make it, that would be great. But if you can't, I'd be more than happy to sit down with you at some time that's mutually agreeable that we could go over that. As I say, it's quite a bit and not enough time here in this presentation to do it. Okay, there's a thing called accounting basis. All right. What it is it's the accounting process that we use to record our revenues and our expenses. We use what is referred to as a cash basis. Well, what does that mean? It means that a revenue does not become recorded until it is actually received by the synagogue and placed into the bank account. So, for example, many of us most of us, I guess, have the monthly online dues statement that comes in. Once that I sign off on that and put all my bank information in, and that money is taken out of my bank account and placed into the synagogue's bank account, that becomes a recorded revenue. Likewise with expenses. When the gas and electric bill comes in, we make the payment. When the check is cut and sent to the company, that becomes a recorded expense. Our books. All right, there are other methods called accrual, modified accrual. I'm not going to get into those. You just need to know that we use the cash basis for our accounting process. Okay, budget development timeline. Let me start out for those of you who didn't look at the open book. The answer to question 2 is A. 997,489 is our budget for next year. So, budget development timeline. It really starts in October when the executive director, along with our director of our education director, first draft of the budget. The treasurer also is involved in that, myself. We then, in October, also present that to the executive committee, the vice presidents and the president, for an initial review of the budget. Then, through November through January, we have a budget advisory committee that we review then that draft budget with. And the intent of that, and the budget advisory committee is made up of congregants from that we have asked or who have asked to be on this committee to help us look at the budget. Victor is a member of our committee this past year. And he's going to be a member next year, right, Victor?
Yes.
Okay.
Whatever you say,
And the intent there is really to have another set of eyes who are congregants who are impacted by the budget, to look at it and say, does this make sense? And this, again, I think is part of another means of our fiduciary responsibility of trying to get input as that budget is being developed. So we review the budget over that timeline, and then the Budget Advisory Committee is asked to make a formal motion of approval once they've had their opportunity to ask questions, make recommendations, for us to make changes in the budget based on that. And then it goes to a final review to the Executive Committee, who approves it for presentation to the board, the full board. And that's done usually in February, March. March then provides us with the final time where it is presented to the board as a whole. And that's when you, as members of the board, will have the opportunity to see the budget as it was developed, and to again raise questions, concerns, issues, and there can still be modifications at that point. But ultimately, then there needs to be an approval by the board, because the ultimate is that we then have to present the budget to the congregation at the annual meeting. And there are certain timelines that we have to meet in terms of the publication of the budget and awareness of the meeting to the congregation, which is part of our Constitution. Okay, I already did what is the Budget Advisory Committee? I believe in your packet you should have a copy of our monthly budget report, and that was, if you pull that out for a minute, I'd appreciate it. It's the report that is, in fact, you're getting kind of a heads up. This is the report that will be presented to the board at next week's meeting. Okay. This report is provided to you on a monthly basis. Sue tries to get that report out to you the Friday prior to the board meeting, so that you have an opportunity to look at it. When that occurs, if you look at the report and you have a question, please email Sue and I with that question. We'll try to get you the answer prior to the board meeting. And at the board meeting, we'll also announce the question that you raised and give the answer, because if you had that question, maybe other board members did as well. Okay, but the report itself, what does it provide? It really provides you with the revenues and expenses that have been incurred year to date as of the end of the month prior to the board meeting. So we're meeting next week in June. The report that you have in front of you is as of May 31st. It is a cumulative report of the revenues and expenses to date. It compares that revenue or expense to the budgeted amount. That's the second column that you'll see there on the left-hand side. And then it will give you what percent of that budgeted amount the year to date is. The second set of three columns to the left, or to the right, is really an historical look at last year's budget at the same time frame. So that second set of three columns gives you what were the expenses or revenues at that point, same point in time in last year's budget. Okay. What to look for? First of all, compare the total revenue collected in comparison to the total expenses. If you look about halfway down on that first page, you should see a figure. Can I see that just for a second, Eric, if I could? Give it right back here. Sorry, I didn't have a copy myself. You'll see at the bottom of the first page, there's an income over or under expenses. If that is in a positive number, the number is 41,939. What that gives you is an overall view of the total revenues that we have collected to date in comparison to the total expenses that we have incurred to that date. And in this case, it's showing that we're in a positive position, meaning that the revenue collected is in excess of the expenses incurred. Okay? So that would be the first thing I would look at. The second thing I'd look at is take a look at each of the revenue and expense lines. Compare the year to date to the budgeted amount. Is it over? Is it under? If it's over, then that's a legitimate area for question. Now, in most cases, when some of these things come up, I will note them in my report to you at the board meeting regarding the budget. In some months, though, there's not a lot that is very different from month to month. But I will try to identify anything that is remarkable for that month, for lack of a better word. I'd also compare and look at last year's. How does, and I take this particularly as it relates to the revenues, and particularly the membership dues. We're constantly looking at that issue. Is our collection of membership dues in line with where we were last year? There's also a dues report that is presented, which Ruth Yorker, our financial secretary, does, which gives an update on that part of the budget. So again, those are the things that I would look at. Look for unders and overs. As I said, I'll try to identify things that are kind of unique. For example, if we're looking, let's say in August and September, we're probably going to see a lot of activity in the school budget, particularly in the supply area, because it's the start of the school year. Maybe not so much in June, because it's just the flow of activities. So again, we'll try to note those things. So with that, I will leave it open to any questions that you might have regarding this. Yes, Rich.
I have a question when I have a comment. Okay. And I think it's one. You refer to it as an expression of the temple, okay? And it is that. I much prefer to use the term that is a plan of action. And we know plans, even the best laid plans, sometimes don't always come to fruition. So when you look at a budget, and if you look at variations in a budget, the next question is, was that a foreseeable change? Could have been a lot colder that winter, therefore your heating bills up, as a simple example of that. But I much prefer the term a financial plan, okay? And a plan is not something that's written in stone, it's a plan. It's how you intend to operate, but there are variables in it.
Noted, and I wouldn't disagree with you at all. Other questions?